expert. I am thrilled to be joined here this week by Aimee Barlet, and we are going to be talking on the topic of horses' energy and using kinesiology, a word that I'm going to have to say a lot tonight, and I'm sure I'm going to stumble over every single time. But I am excited to talk about this topic that I know very little about, that Aimee is an absolute expert in. Aimee, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. I'm really excited.
Awesome. Well, do you mind kicking us off by telling us a bit about yourself and how you got into this and kind of what your background is?
Yeah, absolutely. So, my name is Dr. Aimee Barlet, and I am the founder and practitioner for Sport Horse Kinesiology. I am based currently most of the time out of Fort Worth, Texas, but I also have a residence in Florida. So I travel there sometimes and kind of all over the country. I've gotten some requests recently. I was just on the phone earlier with a gal from South Dakota. So it's a little bit of everywhere. But it's a very unique therapy that I practice, and it came about through some very, I guess, unfortunate circumstances almost 20 years ago in my life. So I had severe medical complications from having my son and ended up having to have brain surgery twice. And it really destroyed my nervous system. So even after that second brain surgery, it helped with the problem that I was having at the time. But then because I wasn't able to take pain medications to recover, it kind of fried my system. It was almost like, tripping the breaker in a house. And so I struggled for the better part of a decade and was pretty much bedridden and, a lot of times disabled. I tried everything under the sun to try to get better. I was absolutely desperate to get my health back and my life back, obviously with a little one to raise. I tried chiropractic, acupuncture, massage, Reiki. I did it all, just trying to, figure out something that would heal me. And while I still prescribe to some of those things, for me, it was almost like a little bit more of, just get me through the symptoms. It wasn't really creating the healing that I needed. And I had one of my practitioners say to me, I think you need to go to this older doctor that gets all the really difficult cases, that nobody can figure out or fix. And so I said, why not? I've tried everything else. So I went to him and he did something a little different with me and focused more on the nervous system. And it's called Applied Kinesiology. So it's not taping, like you hear a lot of the kinesio tape, and it's not kinesiology that you can go get a PhD, and that's more of, the study of movement and biomechanics. So this uses Eastern medicine, and it uses acupuncture and acupressure meridians and points and activating the muscles and actually turning on circuits that may have been disconnected between the brain and the body. And so, the nervous system is running the show, right? It's responsible for our structure, for our internal organs functioning, for, mental, emotional states. So we really need to focus on it. And it's unfortunate that not a lot of people are looking at that, and looking at it that way. So anyway, when I went to this doctor and he started working on me, it was the first time I felt like a spark of life come back to me that I hadn't had in over a decade. And I thought, this is something, I've really got something here. So because he was so old, he was 84, I thought I better learn this for myself because, he's not going to be practicing forever. So I went and learned it for me, and I was really just using it for myself. And then my sister, who lives here in Texas, had a stroke, and she lost the use of her left arm in the stroke. So knowing that it was a neurological issue, I decided to come and help her. And while I was here, I've ridden all my life, and I used to show horses and train and everything. I said, why don't I play with this with the horses? I think I can do it on them. And I didn't know of anyone else who was doing exactly what I do, for the horses. So we tried it out on a couple of hers, and we just got some incredible results. And people started seeing what I was doing, and then they wanted me to work on their horses. So it was so much interest that I thought, I really have something here, and I really need to just do this as a business. And that was almost 2.5 years ago.
Wow, Aimee, that is unbelievable. And how, how are you today?
Oh, I'm fine today. I feel great. I feel better than I did when I was 20. I'm about to make a trip to Florida on Thursday. I'll leave at 4 in the morning. I'll get there at 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. I drive straight through. I stop 3 times, and I'm fine. Most people look at me like,
Oh,
crazy. How do you do that? But I feel good. I feel really good. When the nervous system is firing on all cylinders, it's a really different feeling. So
yeah,
you forget
I
kind
can
of how you're
imagine. I'm
supposed
not
to
sure I know what
feel.
that feels like.
Yeah. Yeah. Most of us forget what it
uh,
feels like to feel that good.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so that was a really helpful story into how you got to where you are today and how you got into applied kinesiology. Can you now define what that means for us for in general and then for horses, like what it is and how it works?
Sure. Well, so all of us, including horses, we're all subject to stress, right? And stress can really impact and almost shut down parts of the nervous system. So if you think about it like electrical systems in a house, right? If there's too much energy that's going into the system, it'll trip the breaker, right? And you have to go over and you have to open up the box and you have to flip the switch back to on because it's been flipped to off because it was too much for the system to handle. Well, the same exact thing happens, and that's how our nervous system works. So we have all of these feedback loops in the body, right? That go from the brain to the body and from the body back up to the brain, and they tell things to turn on or turn off based on this condition or that condition. And so stress, whether it's structural, mental, emotional, or biochemical, like nutrition and toxins, or EMF signals from cell phones, it's a big one, will actually interrupt those signals and sometimes turn them off. So it stops functioning. And it's not only, muscles that aren't firing correctly, but the same nerves that control those muscles also go to organs. So, when we are working on a person or a horse, we're working on the brain, the spine, the lungs, the liver, the kidney, we're working on the whole being and not just one thing or another. There might be a specific problem, like maybe the horse can't, tuck up underneath and, use themselves. Well, maybe their abdominals are shut off, but the abdominals are also tied to the small intestine, so is there an issue there? So it's really neat to be able to kind of look at that. And then we use muscle testing as a form of biofeedback. So when you push, there's a lot of videos where you can see where I've got somebody's arm, and I'm pushing on it like this. When the muscle holds up under pressure, that's a strong connection between the brain and the body. When it doesn't hold up under pressure, we know there's a disconnect. So there's 42 different muscles that I isolate and test, and the body will tell us then where there's a weakness and we know where to correct it. And we'll go back and retest, and then it should be strong.
What does it mean to correct it?
What does it mean to correct it, or what does it need?
Like what does that look like? Yeah.
So it depends on what type of weakness we find. So if there's a weakness on both sides of the body, it's a spinal correction. And we just simply rub up and down lightly on the part of the spine where the nerves that control that muscle innervate the spine. Because anything up and down on the spine turns the signals on, left to right turns it off. Right? So we're going to rub up and down. If we find a weakness on one side of the body and not the other, we kind of have to play detective and we have to go looking for where to fix it. So it could be a neurolymphatic point on the body somewhere. It could be a neurovascular point on the head. It might be an acupuncture meridian that needs to be cleared. And sometimes it's the origin and insertion points of the muscle that need to be stimulated at the same time, to turn on that signal again. So we touch a spot that we think it might be, and then we muscle test. And when we get on the spot that's the correction, that muscle will be strong. So I could put my hand here on you and test your muscle. And if that wasn't the right spot, it would still go weak. But if I put my hand here and it's the right spot, it'll be strong. And as soon as I take my hand away, it would be weak again until we do the correction for it.
Okay. Um, when you're saying weak and strong, sorry, I'm gonna have us like really get into the weeds of what all these things mean.
Yeah.
When can we talk about what you mean by weak and strong and how you're like defining that? Like how are you determining that?
Yep. So, like I said, if the muscle holds up under pressure when I'm pushing, that's a strong muscle and that's a strong signal between the brain and the body. If I went to push a certain way and it went down like this, that's weak. That means that it's shut off and that signal is not strong between the brain and the body. So that's where we need to do a correction.
Okay. That's awesome.
Yeah, so
From
it's
your
not necessarily.
perspective,
Sorry,
sorry,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
No, it's not
No, no, no,
necessarily
you continue. Yeah.
muscular strength, it's neurological. So I can do this on a man who, goes to the gym 5 days a week and is very muscular, and if he's got a disconnect between the brain and the body, I can take one finger and push his arm down, and you wouldn't think that I would be able to do that, and a lot of times they don't either, but I can.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
From your perspective, what makes kinesiology different from other body work or diagnostic modalities?
I love this question because for me, it has been much more root cause and foundational. Like I said, I feel like the other modalities all have their place for sure. And I use them myself personally, but you have to know when to use them and for what. This to me, because you're correcting the signals of the nervous system, and the nervous system is what runs everything. If you've got that firing, it allows the body's natural healing to take place. So, for instance, if you have a tight muscle on one side, it's usually because you have a muscle on the other side that's shut off, right? So this side has to do double the work, right? And tight muscles pull bones out of place. So you might have a tight muscle on this side that's pulling your vertebrae this way, right? And so you can correct that. You can adjust the bone and put it back. But if this is still getting tight, it's going to pull it right back out of place. And you can massage this part so that it loosens up and the bone will go back easier, but you still didn't correct over here. So what I do corrects this side. So when you turn on this side and now they're both firing, this side doesn't have to be tight anymore because it doesn't have to carry twice the load, right? And when you do that, the structure can automatically go back into place. So if this was pulled one direction and now this turns on, it goes back without adjusting the bone. And so, between that and then again, all the signals being able to go between the brain and the organs, you now have a whole body that's functioning like an engine that's firing on all cylinders where maybe it wasn't before. So, I don't use those other modalities nearly as much now because I don't need to, because my body stays, in alignment and performing much better like it should. Does that make sense? I hope I explained that well.
Absolutely. No, no, you're explaining it so clearly. I think it's a really great example of like a real life scenario of you have this tight muscle. What does that look like with the different modalities? I think that that's super helpful. Okay, can we get into what a typical session for looks like for a horse when you're for applied kinesiology?
Yes. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the fact that when I work on a horse, I don't actually touch the horse most of the time. I touch the person and they touch the horse. So because the nervous system is all electrical, the person just serves as a conduit for the electricity between the horse and I. And being able to just muscle test the person, I can get a lot more specific, versus, I can't tell a horse, turn your leg in and raise it up this way, so it's just a much more refined way to do it to me. And we typically start with checking for polarity, the body's positive and negative charge. And then when we make sure that that's correct, we go on to neurological switching. Sometimes the brain can get scrambled. It thinks that up is down and down is up, left and right get switched, front and back. So we make sure that that's correct as well. And then I also make sure that the person, or we call it a surrogate, is hydrated. They have to be hydrated in order to have a good signal, between me and the horse. So we do all of those things on the person first, and then we have them touch the horse and we go through and do the same corrections. At that point, we'll start going through, there's 42 different muscles, like I said. The first time I work on a horse, I don't do all 42 muscles because it would be way too much for them. We're really rearranging the nervous system. We're bringing them out of fight or flight into a rest state, and they will have reactions, sometimes almost like they're sedated. So, they might start blinking a lot more. Their eyes might get very heavy. They might yawn, lick and chew, shake. I've had horses fall asleep before. I've had them lay down in the middle of a session if we were in a stall or in the arena, and they knew that they could do that. So So we will go through typically a third of the muscles, maybe adding in a couple more points from the other groups if we can. And then I always end with asking the horse if they need to do a stress and a trauma release, because that's another part of this therapy that's very different. I've not seen any other modalities that do this, but it's really helpful for anxiety or different situations. Maybe you don't even know what that horse has been through before if you didn't own them from the start. And so a lot of times we can get them past, being afraid of the trailer or being afraid of different training aids or different situations at shows. I have a barrel racer who her horse was afraid of ropes and, guys who are roping. And a lot of the places that she went, she would have the horse in a warm-up arena with people who were, practicing roping. And so it was a problem for this horse. And so we put him in the situation and did a trauma release in it. And from that day forward, she never had a problem with it. And she was able to go anywhere around, people roping right next to him, and he was fine. So we usually end with that. I also have a red light laser that I can use to kind of help facilitate moving energy and decreasing pain. I've incorporated a thermography camera into my practice so that I can, show somebody the before and after of inflammation and how much it decreased. Or sometimes we need to go looking for a spot. Maybe there's a mystery type situation that, vets haven't been able to figure out. Nobody's been able to figure out. And sometimes we can find what that is and where it is and treat it just with that camera and find, a hot spot of inflammation. So it can be really helpful. The other thing that I decided to incorporate into my practice as of last year is craniosacral work for horses. I had found in my own experience that it's very foundational because the bones in the skull, even though they seem like they don't move, they do. And so there's a very subtle expansion and contraction of those bones, and they can be misaligned. They can start pushing on cranial nerves. And, you think about where we have, bridles and halters, and there's a lot of nerves that come down through, right along the lines of where the tack sits. So, sometimes things get pinched and moved, and it's really beneficial to the horse to be able to release that. If they have some sort of cranial torsion, you can work on a horse from the pole down, and that twist at the beginning at the head will always translate down through the rest of the body. So sometimes you need to correct that first before you can move into the rest of it. But I will now always ask the horse's body through muscle testing, what's priority? Do they need craniosacral? Do they need kinesiology? Which one do we need to do first, or, if at all? So that's kind of how a session looks. We usually do that first session, and we usually wait about 2 weeks. And then we come back and we tune up the first set and we do the second set. And then we usually wait another 2 weeks and we come back and we tune up the first and second set and we do the third. And then we can try to space it out a little bit longer and see if we can go 4 weeks or 6 weeks, depending on the horse. If they're used, at a high level athletes always need a little more body work, regular maintenance. So, it just stands to reason that they would too.
Yeah. Okay, so you said in the first session you test about a third of their muscles. Can you walk us through what that actually looks like? So you are interacting with the rider and the rider is interacting with the horse. What are you doing with the rider? What is the rider doing with the horse? And what's kind of the cause and effect?
Yeah. So the treatment looks exactly the same for a person as it does for a horse, except the person, when the horse is involved, is just touching the horse over here. So I might be muscle testing this side and they've got their hand over here on the horse. Okay. And then we'll switch sides, we'll switch places, and then they're holding the horse over here and I'm muscle testing this side. And so we'll go through and we'll do that. And we'll start with, the muscles that can connect to the brain and then to the spine and the stomach and the spleen and the heart. And we just kind of go through all of them until we get to the large intestine, which is usually the last one. And we're, again, just finding those weaknesses wherever the arm or the leg goes weak. We'll do a correction and we'll come back and we'll retest it.
And is the correction, apologies if my questions feel naive.
That's
Is the
okay.
correction, is it always like fixing this, like the opposite muscle? Is that how it works? Like if they're weak on the right side, right shoulder? Are you going and fixing the left shoulder? Like how, like, let's say they're weak on the right shoulder. What does the correction look like?
So that's where we have to go looking for the right place to do the correction, basically. So it could be a lymphatic point, right? So say this arm was weak, if it's like this and I'm trying to push down and out and I can push it. So I might come to the person and I might hold my fingers here, which is a neurolymphatic point for that muscle. Okay. So if when I push here, if I touch here, now I retest the arm and it's strong, I know that this is where we need to do the correction. And if that's the case, I'm going to work both neurolymphatic points, which is just like rubbing them out, and then go back and retest the arm, and then it should be strong under pressure. If it's not this spot, it could be a neurovascular point on the head. So it might be these 2 points right here on the forehead. So I'll hold like this, right? And then I'll test the arm. And if the arm is strong, I know that this is where we correct it. When it's a neurovascular point on the head, the correction involves me using the electricity in my body to jumpstart those points on the horse through the person. And I know that sounds really crazy, but trust me, it works. And so what I'll do is I'll just hold my fingers on those points. And I'm waiting to feel a pulse that comes up and beats together at the same time under both sets of fingers. And when I feel that, I know that now that circuit is reconnected, and we'll go back and we'll retest the muscle without me touching here, and it should be strong. So we just kind of have to go through and figure out where it needs to be fixed, but it's always one of those 4 things, neurolymphatic, neurovascular, acupuncture meridian, or the origin and insertion points of the muscle. If there's a one-sided weakness, if it's both sides, it's always on the spine.
Okay, so you're always checking one of those 4 things. When you have a weakness, you're always checking one of those 4 things. And then the correction is either like the light rubbing, or if it's the neurological one, it looks a little different. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Thank you. You are being very you're walking you're walking me through it as if I'm a kindergartner, because apparently that is how my brain is working this evening.
No, it's a lot
Um,
to wrap your mind around. I have to say, I have worked on even my chiropractor, because he said to me one day, he said, I never thought I would see your back straight, and I want to know what you're doing. So I said, well, I'll show you. Let me work on you one day. And so I came in and he was crooked, one shoulder was a little lower and he was maybe had a little twist to him, And so I went through the whole thing and did it on him. And even though he has a very good understanding, of the physiology and how all of that works, just with his mouth open. And he was like, I can't wrap my mind around how this just fixed me, so you're in good company.
feels like magic.
That's what people call it. People actually introduce me that way. I had someone do that to me last week. They said, they're introducing me to a person that they knew, and they said, so what do you do? And he said, oh, she does magic. So
That's what it sounds like to me. Although I'm understanding the science behind it now, and that helps demystify it a bit.
and here's the
Okay.
other thing about this too, if I could just say really quickly, even when you see it, it's not the same as experiencing it and feeling it. Because a lot of people will stand back and go, oh, you're just pushing different. You're just, 1 minute you're not pushing as hard, and that's why the arm can hold up. And the next minute you're pushing harder. And I'm really not. Usually I'm pushing harder after the correction because I want to make sure that it's good and strong. I want to make sure I got it. But for the person or for the horse, it feels so much different because it's almost like there just wasn't anything there between the brain and the muscle, and they just couldn't hold their arm up. And I really like to hit home with this point for riders. And I think it's so important that a rider feels the weaknesses in their horse, because just like if I tell you as a person, hold your arm up when I push and you can't, sometimes we are asking things of our horses that they physically cannot do. And it's not necessarily a behavioral issue or they just want to be a jerk that day. Sometimes they cannot do what we're asking, just like the person couldn't hold their arm up. And so I think it's really important to just see it through that lens sometimes and go, okay, well, what's the underlying problem? Let's look a little bit deeper and let's make sure that we're supporting them, fully in every way possible so that they can do the job and they can do what we're asking of them.
And is it right that they can't do it because the like nerve pathway, the communication with that muscle is currently cut off? Is that right?
Correct. Correct. And
Yeah.
like I said, it could be something nutritional. It could be something that they need that they're not getting. It could be something that they're getting that they shouldn't be getting. It could be that maybe they've been in a stall too much and they have stuck lymph points on their body. And hard brushing isn't going to do it. It's more of like a light, with a real soft curry would help, to loosen up the lymph and help that flow better. Sometimes it's just the stress of, being trailered or competition, or, somebody was really not nice to them when they were, 2 years old and in training for the first time. And, they get trauma just like we do.
Yeah, absolutely. You did talk about trauma response and ending your sessions that way. Can you talk us through what that looks like and what the assessment and correction looks like?
Yeah. So when I ask the body, it's literally just me, muscle testing. Our thoughts produce a frequency. And so I literally in my mind can just, say, indicate, show me yes, show me no. And usually yes is a strong muscle and a no is a weak muscle. And then I'm asking the body, could this horse benefit from doing a trauma or stress release? And if it's a strong yes, then I'll go ahead and do it. And what that looks like, and I don't recommend that other people do this, especially if it's their own horse, because usually horse people are empathic, meaning that they want to take the energy. They want to prevent everybody else from feeling pain, and right, they'll gladly take it so someone else doesn't have to feel it. A lot of times if there's negative energy in the horse, it can get stuck in that person. So this is a great tool for people to be able to use for themselves. This is how I do it on the horses, but again, if it's your particular horse and you have a deep connection, I don't recommend that owners do this. But you think about if we're really stressed, right, our natural response sometimes is just to be like, oh my gosh, right? We just kind of put our hands to our head. And so that's literally what we do. So I put one hand over the forehead and then one hand over the back of my head like this. And I stand with my back against the horse. This is the only time that I really, touch them unless I'm doing craniosacral. And I just stand there and I wait to feel a pulse that beats together under both hands at the same time, right? And it might start in the front and then might go to the back. But when I get both of them beating together at the same time, that's when I know that it's kind of released. And I feel like a pulsation too in my head. But you'll see the horse react. You'll see them kind of right? Or they might start falling asleep. Their eyes might get really heavy, or, again, just a big lick and chew or a big yawn or multiple yawns. I even have horses that will do almost like a big downward dog stretch, and they'll put their front, legs way out in front, and they'll get down as low as they can and they'll stretch. So you can see them have a response from this. But that's the way that you can release trauma and stress from the subconscious.
It is so fascinating. I love this. Um, okay, when this is perhaps something you've already described with the strong or weak, but I got a question that's when you say a muscle has integrity or doesn't have integrity, what exactly are you feeling for?
So again, it's just a light pressure. It's not a strength competition. Usually what I'm doing is I'm just asking somebody to match my pressure. So if I go to push on a muscle and they can hold their arm or their leg or whatever it is that we're testing, if they can hold against that light, steady pressure, then that is a strong muscle with integrity, right? If they can't, if their arm goes weak, then we know that that's where there's a problem. So my favorite test, and you all can try this at home with somebody, is to use a cell phone, because the cell phone signals always interrupt that signal, right? And so you can literally just, test somebody without it first, right? And see that they have a strong muscle. And then you have them hold it in their other hand. And then while they're holding it like this, you push on that arm and you push the same way, and they will not be able to hold their arm up.
That is really wild. Oh my
It is.
goodness. Okay.
Here's one better
Uh,
for you. If you have another person standing next to them and they're holding the phone, but the person you're testing is not holding the phone, right? And so you test them, you make sure their arm is strong. The person with the phone, then you have them touch the other person's shoulder and their arm will go weak. And I really want to make this point, riders, okay? if you have a phone on you or a smartwatch or the earbuds, they all do the same thing. And if you have that on you and you're touching your horse, what is it doing to the horse? Right? So
Yeah.
it's shutting the horse down. And how many times do we see riders with all three, right? And so then they're asking their horse to do something. And as long as they're touching that horse, it does shut them down. So it
Wow.
also is setting them up for injury. Because if you think about it, if you're pushing here and this muscle is not firing, now you're putting a lot of pressure on the joints, right? And too much pressure on the joints over time could create an injury. So it's
Yeah,
really important that we're free of that kind of stuff when we're riding.
absolutely. Okay. Are there signs owners can look for before a session that indicate the horse is out of balance? Or another kind of follow on to this question would just be like, what makes a good candidate in a horse for this type of therapy?
So I have different types of clients. I have some where, hey, there's a problem, and it could be anything from my horse doesn't feel balanced, or their back is very hollow, or they're not using themselves from behind. Could be something like, he just seems a little bit off, or I feel like I could be getting more out of them and I'm not, and I don't know why. Um, you know and then I have other clients who they just understand that it's really important to do body work and support the horse through performance. And so maybe they're high level athletes. I've got several horses that are at the NCDHA futurity this week, and they're having me work on their horses ahead of their go rounds because they want to make sure that their horse is tuned up and performing at their absolute best before they step into the ring. So it's a little bit of both. I find that horses that are extremely sensitive tend to have a bigger result from it, if that makes sense. Horses that are kind of stoic and don't ever show that they really have a problem, you know their improvements might be a little bit more subtle. But those are typically the cases. So thoroughbreds being like they are, I have a lot of thoroughbred clients, and they're super sensitive, and again, we get really good results with them. Sometimes it's an anxiety issue, if they're just afraid of something, or they won't get in the trailer, or it could be even an injury. I've had really good success with navicular, with even bone injuries healing. So, it could be a little bit of everything.
Got it. Okay. How does muscle testing allow you to pinpoint things like nutrient deficiencies or organ stress?
Because the muscles are each tied to a different organ system, that's how we kind of do that. So, like if you have your arm out with your thumb down like this, and I'm pushing down and out, that's a stomach point. If I push up and out like this, that's a liver point. So each muscle that we're testing is always tied to a different organ. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a problem with that organ. It could, but it doesn't always necessarily mean that. It could just be something, in that circuit that's off that needs to be corrected because of some sort of stress that turned it off. I will say that one of the things that owners appreciate the most is being able to muscle test for feed and for supplements. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. It takes a lot of the time and the trial and error, and the financial implications too, of like, oh, let's try this supplement, let's try this one. You could go through 10 before you find one and notice a change in your horse, and then that might even take several weeks, right? So we're able to kind of fine tune that a little bit, and it's almost like personalized nutrition with people. And I've done it with myself too. I've muscle tested myself for my supplements and for different foods, and what's going to work best with my body. So if you put something on a horse and you muscle test them and the arm is strong, that's a body saying yes to that. If you test them and it says no, that's the body saying no, thank you, I don't need that, or I don't want it, or maybe not right now. So that's one of the ways that we can kind of tailor treatments.
Super cool. Okay. So, how do you differentiate between structural, chemical, and emotional imbalances?
So we don't necessarily always know what it is coming from unless we can't get a muscle to correct. And then we can go, okay, what else do we need to look at that's deeper? And so sometimes I'll look at, sorry, I'm getting pop-ups on my screen. Sometimes I'll look at, what the nutritional deficiencies for that particular muscle might be if none of the other corrections are working, and then we can either put that supplement on the horse or have the person hold it, and see if that corrects it. And then sometimes it's again just a matter of doing a trauma or stress release and getting the emotion out that way. There's a lot more that you can do with people than you can with horses. I mean, there's color balances and different elements of the earth and that kind of thing that you can do balances around, and it's a little bit more complex, but obviously we can't do things like that with a horse.
Yeah. I mean, even what you are able to do is super cool. So, um, but it's great to know that the opportunities with a human are even like broader. Um, okay. So I believe I know the answer to this. I think you kind of covered it, but just want to make sure I get this question asked. It's just, can kinesiology help distinguish between pain, a training issue, and emotional stress?
um that's a good question. I guess sometimes, because if you did a trauma release and then it was better, like there's certain things like with the horse that doesn't want to be around a roping, that was an emotional stress for that horse. It wasn't structural, it wasn't biochemical. We knew that was an emotional thing. So we knew that we needed to do a stress release for it. So again, just using the muscle testing, we try to get as specific as possible. But the great thing about it is that once you correct wherever there's weaknesses, the whole system should work better. So you don't always necessarily need to know, exactly what it
Yeah.
is, because if you make the correction and the whole body is now able to heal, it should kind of take care of whatever it was. Again, as long as you're giving the body what it needs and not giving it something that it doesn't.
That makes perfect sense. Okay. Are there patterns or common imbalance areas you see frequently in performance horses?
So there's one that I see specifically in horses and riders, and it's a bladder point, and it's with the sacrospinalis muscle, which runs from the base of the skull to the top of the sacrum, and it literally lines each side of the spine from top to bottom. And so it's usually out on one side, and the correction for it is usually origin and insertion. So you would rub the top and the bottom, of where those muscles intersect, and that's the fix. And so I haven't really figured out why it's like that on horses and riders, but it usually is. And that can, obviously impact a whole host of different things, because if those muscles aren't holding the spine, it allows for the spine to be able to twist, where you wouldn't want it to.
Yeah. I mean, back pain, I think it's just like every rider has it. So that makes sense. Um, okay. Where does kinesiology fit alongside traditional veterinary care?
I think it's a great compliment. And, there have been times where veterinarians have said to me, they've seen the before and after thermography pictures, and they're like, I can't do what you just did. So I think that working with them and working together as a team is a really great approach. The one thing that I would say is I personally, before I did this, used this as a last resort instead of my go-to. And now it's the opposite. And I really would encourage people and invite them to try, this as a go-to instead of a last resort. I know it's different. I know it's unusual. But so was chiropractic years ago. And I think that's now, become a lot more normalized. So, um, that's kind of the bigger takeaway right there for me.
And is my understanding correct that I mean, there doesn't really seem to be a lot of risk with it, right? Like yeah.
No, because you're just turning on the signals that should already be working anyway, so you're just allowing the body's natural healing to take place.
Got it. I mean, that makes the argument pretty easy.
Yes.
Uh,
The other really
what's
nice thing
the
that I want
biggest
to
miscon Sorry, go ahead.
sorry. The other thing I want to say about it, which is really neat, is that, some horses can't tolerate manipulation, right? And so this is so nice because literally all they feel is this. And as long as you can just touch them, you can work on them. Same with a person. I was too fragile and sensitive to have all the muscle testing done. So it was done through a person for me personally, and so if you've got injuries, or like my sister who had the stroke, she couldn't be muscle tested on her left side. So we used another person to do that. So there's a lot of advantages to this that, other modalities just don't have.
Yeah. Um, what's the biggest misconception you wish horse owners understood about applied kinesiology?
That energy is powerful and it's more powerful than you think. Your thoughts actually can affect your horse. Your thoughts affect your own body. I just did a video recently where I had somebody think of something happy and I pushed on their arm and they could hold their arm up and I said, okay, now think about something sad or traumatic, and their arm went straight down. So energy is real, even though we can't see it. And I always like to, liken it to Wi-Fi, because people can look at what I do and say, oh, it's whatever. But, Wi-Fi is real. You believe in Wi-Fi and you can't see it, but we know it's real, and so the same thing with this. And I always like to tell people too that, with this work, there's no placebo effect. It either works or it doesn't on the animals, right? They don't know what you're doing. So
True. They're not faking it.
no.
That's that makes a lot of sense. Okay. How do you explain the difference between true kinesiology and the pop-up versions people sometimes see online?
I don't really know what they're referring to by that, so I don't know if I can answer
I
that.
don't either. Okay.
Sorry.
Well, no worries. Um, okay. Are there simple things every rider could start doing to support better energetic balance in their horse?
Again, positive thoughts, positive interactions with your horse. There's some foundational things that I can teach and I will be offering soon that will help, that riders can learn for themselves, like to how to correct that neurological switching and polarity and things like that. So, be checking my website, sporthorsekinesiology.com, and my social media, because I'll be kind of coming out and launching these things very soon where people can purchase an online course and they can learn some of those foundational techniques for themselves that they can do daily to support not only them, but their horse.
That's awesome. Are there this is probably gonna be covered within that, but are there daily habits or routines that undo a horse's energetic balance without people realizing it?
Stress. I mean, that's the biggest one. Stress. And I would say magnets as well. And this is not going to be a popular, a popular notion, but that was one of the first things that my doctor told me when I went to for this, is he said, stay away from magnets. And I was like, well, why, And he said, because it causes neurological switching and it reverses polarity. And I have found that to be true. I've muscle tested the different, magnetic, therapy devices out there, and it completely undoes what I do. So it's
Wow.
unfortunate, but yeah.
Okay. Um, what's the number one thing you wish people understood about how horses hold and express stress?
They can't always tell us, right? And some of them are very stoic. Um, some of them are very protective of their riders. Sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's them wanting to be, perfect and not do a bad job for you. So just kind of putting yourself in their shoes and listening, trying to be as attuned to them as possible and listening. And then, obviously therapies like this give them a voice that they may not otherwise have.
I love that. How has your own healing journey shaped the way you work with horses today?
Again, it's just made me, really look through a different lens and be sensitive and ask the questions of, where is this coming from a root cause, right? Let's get rid of that. If you're sitting on a tack, you don't want to just put something between you and the tack. You want to remove the tack. And so I'm very much minded that way now.
Yeah. After 30 plus years with horses, what still surprises you in your work?
And just how compassionate they are toward us. They just
Yeah,
have the
they're the
biggest
best.
hearts. Yep.
We're so lucky.
Yes.
Um, okay, and then my last question I have for you, and then I'll let you, I'll open it up to you in case there's things we haven't covered. But what's the most rewarding part of helping horses through kinesiology?
seeing them release tension, release pain, feel better, they always turn around and it's like you can feel them saying thank you. It's sometimes emotional for me just how they react, and then seeing people witness that in their horses. I've had owners just stand there and cry because they haven't seen their horse feel good in a long time, or maybe they got to ride a horse again that they never thought they would be able to ride again. um, there's been some really cool moments. I've worked on dogs that looked like they were about to die, that had had a stroke or seizure or whatever, and 4 days later they're up running around playing with the other dogs. So just to be able to give that back to not only them but to the owners is it's special. It's really special. This is the most rewarding thing I could ever do.
It's unreal. Super cool. Okay, Amy, this has been so immense. I mean, you're taking a very complex topic and making it very understandable. And I like just I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing about this topic with us this evening. And I think everybody listening is gonna Google how to access more of this and learn more about it. Um, are there anything related to this topic that we haven't covered yet? And or any kind of anything that else that we need to share with the audience? Oh, did I lose her? Maybe, maybe I might have lost her. Oh, okay. Well, I mean that was wonderful. So I think we can cap it off there. But everyone, thank you so much for submitting your questions, and that was a wonderful conversation on the topic of applied kinesiology. Have a wonderful evening.